The classroom was silent except for the muffled sound of the central air conditioner that hummed too loudly for a spring morning in a school in the southern United States. In the corner of the room, a boy sitting in the third row clutched a poorly colored drawing with nervous hands. When the teacher leaned over him to criticize his lack of attention during the activity, she asked, almost as if making a joke, a question that froze the air, "Do you even have a father at home to look at this with you?" Eyes turned, timid laughter from classmates seemed like a distant echo. The boy only lowered his eyes, but something in his chest closed, a mixture of shame and anger that he couldn't name. The teacher, belatedly realizing the weight of what she had said, tried to soften the moment, but it was already too late. And then, 5 minutes later, the classroom door opened. The man who entered looked like he had stepped out of a movie. Impeccable uniform, posture straight as a stake. His military shoes gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and the insignia on his shoulder commanded respect even before any word was spoken. It was the boy's father. Marcus Fletcher felt his stomach tighten as his father's imposing figure filled the doorway of Ms. Bradshaw's fifth-grade classroom. Every eye darted between him and the man in uniform, their expressions a mixture of surprise and curiosity. The cloying scent of dry erase markers hung in the air, mixing with the faint smell of the peanut butter and jelly sandwiches from lunch period that never quite dissipated. His father's voice, controlled yet warm, broke the silence. "I apologize for the interruption. I just returned from deployment and wanted to surprise my son." The room felt unbearably hot to Marcus despite the overworked air conditioner. His palms were slick with sweat as they gripped the colored pencil he'd been using moments before. The drawing that Ms. Bradshaw had criticized, a science project blueprint they'd been planning over letters and phone calls for weeks, suddenly felt childish and inadequate. "Staff Sergeant Fletcher, what an unexpected pleasure." Ms. Bradshaw's voice had transformed completely, sweet and welcoming now. The same voice that moments ago had dripped with condescension when questioning whether Marcus had a father at home. "We were just reviewing the children's science fair proposals." Marcus watched as his father's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. Had he heard what she said? Did someone tell him? The boy's heart hammered against his ribs as his father crossed the room in 4 precise steps, military boots clicking against the linoleum floor. Staff Sergeant James Fletcher knelt beside his son's desk, placing a strong hand on the boy's shoulder. The warmth of that touch pushed back against the chill of embarrassment that had enveloped Marcus moments earlier. "Let me see what you've been working on, son," he said, his attention completely focused on Marcus, as if Ms. Bradshaw and the 23 other students had ceased to exist. Marcus slid the paper toward his father, the colorful sketch of an irrigation system based on his grandmother's community garden techniques. His father studied it with genuine interest, nodding as he traced the pencil lines with his index finger. "This is excellent work. I recognize those collection barrels we discussed." His father's voice carried just enough volume for everyone to hear without seeming intentional. "Your grandmother would be proud to see her wisdom put to such good use." If you're finding yourself drawn into this story of dignity in the face of prejudice, take a moment to hit that subscribe button and like this video. Your support helps bring more powerful stories like this one to light. Ms. Bradshaw cleared her throat, hovering nearby. "We were discussing the feasibility of the projects. Some of our proposals are rather ambitious for 5th grade level work." Marcus felt his father's hand tighten slightly on his shoulder before relaxing again. When James Fletcher stood to his full height, Ms. Bradshaw seemed to shrink despite being a tall woman herself. "My son has been planning this project for months with guidance from both myself and his grandmother, who maintained sustainable community gardens for 40 years, he said, his tone pleasant but firm. "I've sent him detailed diagrams from my station. I believe in setting high expectations for our children, don't you, Ms. Bradshaw?" The room felt charged with electricity. Marcus glanced at his best friend, Darius, who sat 3 seats away. Darius's eyes were wide, his mouth slightly open in a mixture of shock and admiration. Other students shifted in their seats, unused to seeing their stern teacher handled so deftly by a parent. "Of course, Staff Sergeant Fletcher. We simply want to ensure all students have adequate support at home for their projects." Her emphasis on adequate support hung in the air like a challenge. "I understand completely." His father's smile never wavered. "That's why I've taken leave specifically to be here for the science fair. I wouldn't miss it for the world." The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to touch. Marcus felt a strange mixture of pride and anxiety swirling in his chest. His father was here, defending him, believing in him, but what would happen when the classroom door closed and his father was gone? "Marcus," his father turned back to him, "I'll pick you up after school. We can gather supplies for your project this afternoon." As his father turned to leave, he paused at Ms. Bradshaw's desk. "Thank you for nurturing these young minds. It's teachers like you who shape the future of our country." The words were perfect, polite, appreciative, yet Marcus could hear the subtle edge beneath them. The door closed behind Staff Sergeant Fletcher, leaving behind a classroom transformed. Ms. Bradshaw's face was flushed, her lips pressed into a thin line as she returned to the front of the class. "Well," she said, composing herself, "let's continue with our proposals." But something had shifted. Marcus felt it in the way his classmates looked at him now, with new curiosity, some with respect, others with uncertainty. Ms. Bradshaw avoided his desk for the remainder of the period, calling on other students, her eyes sliding past him as if he had suddenly become invisible. When the bell rang signaling the end of the day, Marcus gathered his books slowly, his movements deliberate. The classroom emptied quickly, children rushing toward freedom, toward waiting parents and afternoon activities. "Marcus!" Ms. Bradshaw's voice stopped him at the door. "I hope you understand that my concern was only about the complexity of your project." He turned to face her, this woman who had wielded such power over his daily life since September. For the first time, he saw something like uncertainty in her eyes. "My dad has been helping me every step of the way, Ms. Bradshaw," he said quietly. "Even when he's far away." Outside, the warm spring afternoon embraced him, the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming dogwood trees washing away the sterile classroom air. His father stood beside their old blue Chevrolet, still in his uniform, sunglasses reflecting the afternoon light. "How was the rest of your day?" his father asked as they drove home, windows down, the wind ruffling Marcus's closely cropped hair. Marcus considered the question, feeling the weight of the day's events pressing against his chest. "It was different," he finally said. His father nodded, understanding in the silence between them. "Different isn't always bad." "She asked if I even had a father at home," Marcus blurted out, the words escaping before he could contain them. "Right before you came." Everyone laughed. His father's hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles whitening briefly before relaxing. The car slowed as they approached a red light. When he turned to look at Marcus, his expression was composed, but his eyes held a contained fire. "You and I both know the truth," he said carefully. "Sometimes people make assumptions based on what they think they know rather than what is." But why would she say that? In front of everyone. The light turned green, and they moved forward again, the car gaining momentum like Marcus's growing indignation. "Some people carry ideas inside them that aren't always fair or true," his father explained. "Ideas about who people are based on what they look like or where they come from. Our job isn't to carry their mistaken ideas for them. Our job is to live our truth with dignity." Have you ever experienced a moment when someone made an unfair assumption about you or your family? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help others feel less alone. Marcus thought about this as they pulled into the driveway of their modest two-story home. His grandmother's flower beds lined the walkway, bursting with early spring blooms, daffodils, tulips, and hyacinths in a riot of colors. The house wasn't large or fancy, but it was immaculately maintained, with fresh paint and clean windows that reflected the afternoon sun. "Your grandmother's waiting inside," his father said as they parked. "She's been cooking all day to welcome me home." The smell hit Marcus the moment they opened the front door, his grandmother's famous jambalaya, rich with spices and memories of family gatherings. The house was warm with cooking heat and love, so different from the artificial chill of the classroom. Eleanor Fletcher stood in the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on an apron worn soft with years of use. At 68, she carried herself with a straight-backed dignity that seemed to run in the Fletcher family. Her dark skin was lined with years of laughter and worry, her silver-threaded hair pulled back in a neat bun. "There are my men," she said, opening her arms wide. Marcus fell into his grandmother's embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of vanilla extract and lavender that seemed to follow her everywhere. Over his head, he heard his father and grandmother exchange quiet words about what had happened at school. "We'll discuss it later," his grandmother murmured, her hand gently stroking Marcus's back. "Right now, we celebrate your father's return." Dinner that night was filled with stories. His father's carefully edited tales from his deployment, his grandmother's updates about the community garden she'd helped establish at the senior center, Marcus's recounting of school events that had nothing to do with Ms. Bradshaw or science fair projects. Later, as Marcus helped his grandmother with the dishes while his father took a much-needed shower, Eleanor Fletcher broached the subject again. "Your teacher," she began, her hand steady as she passed him a plate to dry. "She's the one who made the comment about your father?" Marcus nodded, focusing intently on drying the plate in his hands. "Harriet Bradshaw," his grandmother said thoughtfully. "I taught her sophomore English 30 years ago." This revelation startled Marcus so much that he nearly dropped the plate. "You taught Ms. Bradshaw? At Westfield High?" "I did indeed. Before they pushed me into early retirement to make room for younger teachers." There was no bitterness in her voice, just a statement of fact. She was a bright student. Ambitious, but narrow in her thinking. "She doesn't like me," Marcus said quietly. His grandmother stopped washing, turning to face him fully. "It may not be about liking you, child. Some people see the world through a very small window. They only recognize what fits into the frame they've built." "But it's not fair." "No," his grandmother agreed, taking the towel from his hands and drying her own. "It's not fair. But it is an opportunity." "An opportunity for what?" "To decide who you are going to be when the world doesn't see you clearly." She took his face between her palms, her skin soft against his cheeks. "Will you become small and bitter? Or will you stand tall and show them who you truly are?" The question hung between them, weighty with importance beyond his 10 years. Before he could answer, his father entered the kitchen, hair damp from the shower, dressed in civilian clothes that somehow didn't diminish his military bearing. "Mom giving you wisdom?" he asked with a smile. "Always," Eleanor replied, dropping her hands from Marcus's face but maintaining that soul-searching gaze for one moment longer. "Someone has to counterbalance all that military precision you're teaching him." James laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "Speaking of which, let's take a look at that science project blueprint. I brought some materials that might help." The next 2 hours were spent at the dining room table, father and son bent over papers and diagrams, grandmother occasionally offering suggestions based on her years of practical gardening knowledge. By the time Marcus went to bed, the irrigation system had evolved from a simple sketch to a detailed plan with measured dimensions and a materials list. As his father tucked him in, a ritual that felt both familiar and strange after so many months apart, Marcus found the courage to ask the question that had been weighing on him. "Dad, what if Ms. Bradshaw tries to fail my project?" His father sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping slightly under his weight. In the dim glow of the bedside lamp, his face looked both younger and older than Marcus remembered. "Do you think your project deserves to fail?" he asked. "No. It's good. We made it good together. Then it won't fail." The certainty in his father's voice was comforting. "But even if it did, that wouldn't define you or your work. Do you understand?" Marcus nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure he did. "Your worth isn't determined by someone else's judgment of you." His father smoothed the blanket, a gesture so gentle it seemed at odds with his strong, calloused hands. "Remember that, always." Sleep came easily that night, wrapped in the security of having both his father and grandmother under the same roof. But morning brought with it the inevitable return to school, to Ms. Bradshaw's classroom, to the whispers and stares that awaited him. Breakfast was a lively affair, his grandmother insisting on a full spread, eggs, grits, bacon, and her famous biscuits with honey. "Growing boys need proper fuel," she insisted, piling food onto his plate despite his protests that he wasn't that hungry. His father, already dressed for the day in pressed slacks and a button-down shirt that hinted at his military precision, drank coffee and reviewed the morning paper. The domesticity of the scene was both comforting and strange, a glimpse into what their life might be like if his father weren't deployed so often. "I'll drive you to school today," his father announced as Marcus gathered his backpack. The ride was quiet, the morning traffic flowing smoothly through their suburban neighborhood. Oak trees lined the streets, their spring foliage creating dappled shadows across the car's hood. As they approached the school, Marcus felt his anxiety building, a physical pressure in his chest. "Dad," he said as they pulled up to the drop-off lane, Are you going to come in again? His father turned to him, studying his face. Do you want me to? The question was genuine, leaving the choice entirely in Marcus's hands. He thought about it, imagining his father walking him to class. The pride and protection that would offer weighed against the potential for more attention, more whispers. I need to do this part myself, he finally said. His father nodded, respect evident in his expression. I understand. But know this, I'm always with you, even when I'm not physically present. That's what Ms. Bradshaw doesn't understand. Family isn't just about who sits at your dinner table every night. If you're finding strength in this father's wisdom and support, take a moment to hit that subscribe button. Stories of dignity and quiet courage like this one are what we're all about. The school day unfolded differently than Marcus had anticipated. Instead of the confrontation he'd feared, Ms. Bradshaw maintained a careful, professional distance. During science period, she announced that project proposals would be reviewed by a committee rather than just herself, a new procedure that hadn't existed the day before. Due to the impressive ambition of many of your projects, she explained, her eyes gliding over the classroom without landing on any particular student, we want to ensure everyone receives appropriate feedback and support. Darius leaned over as she turned to write on the whiteboard. Your dad scared her, he whispered, admiration clear in his voice. He didn't scare her, Marcus whispered back, though he wasn't entirely convinced of this himself. He just stood up for me. Man, I wish my mom could do that. She always says to just keep my head down and get good grades. The comment stayed with Marcus throughout the day, through math and language arts, through the controlled chaos of lunch period and the welcome freedom of recess. The concept of keeping your head down versus standing tall echoed his grandmother's words from the night before. At the end of the day, it was his grandmother who waited in the pickup lane, her ancient Buick easily recognizable among the SUVs and minivans. As he slid into the passenger seat, the familiar scent of her lavender perfume enveloped him. Your father had some business at the base, she explained as they pulled away from the curb. He'll be home for dinner. How was school today? Marcus considered the question carefully. Different, he finally said, echoing his response to his father the day before. His grandmother's knowing smile told him she understood all that the single word contained. Different is how change begins, she said, turning onto their street. Speaking of change, we have some supplies to pick up for your project. Your father left a list. The hardware store was unusually busy for a weekday afternoon. As they navigated the aisles, gathering PVC pipes, connectors, and other materials from his father's precisely detailed list, Marcus noticed how people responded to his grandmother. Store employees greeted her by name, other customers stopped to chat, and even the normally gruff manager emerged from his office to ask after Staff Sergeant Fletcher. Everyone knows, Dad? Marcus asked as they loaded their purchases into the car. Your father grew up in this town, his grandmother reminded him. Before he was Staff Sergeant Fletcher, he was just Jamie Fletcher, the boy who helped elderly neighbors with their yard work and coached Little League even while working 2 jobs to save for college. This image of his father, young, still forming into the man he would become, was fascinating to Marcus. Was he always so perfect? His grandmother's laugh was rich and genuine. Perfect. Child, your father failed his driver's test twice. He got a D in algebra his freshman year that nearly broke his spirit. And the first time he asked a girl to dance at a school function, he stepped on her toes so badly she had to sit out the rest of the night. Marcus tried to reconcile these stories with the disciplined, confident man he knew. But he seems like he never messes up now. That's because he learned from every mistake, his grandmother said as they pulled into their driveway. He didn't let failure define him. He let it refine him. The next week passed in a rhythm both familiar and new. Each morning, either his father or grandmother would drive him to school. Ms. Bradshaw maintained her professional distance, though Marcus noticed she seemed to call on him more frequently during class discussions, as if testing whether his father's presence had somehow enhanced his academic abilities overnight. The science fair project progressed steadily each evening, father and son working side by side in the garage that had been temporarily transformed into a workshop. The irrigation system took shape, incorporating both modern efficiency and his grandmother's time-tested gardening wisdom. It was during one of these evening sessions, his father's hands guiding his as they connected the final pieces of the water distribution system, that Marcus gathered the courage to ask another question that had been troubling him. "Dad, why does Ms. Bradshaw think kids like me don't have fathers at home?" His father's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their work. "That's a complicated question with an ugly history behind it," he said carefully. "Some people carry ideas about certain families being less complete or committed than others, especially when those families look like ours. Because we're black. Yes. And for single mothers raising children, and for many other family structures that don't match what some people think of as normal or proper." His father's voice remained steady, matter of fact. "These ideas have been around for generations, passed down like inherited traits." "But that's wrong." Marcus's indignation was clear in his voice. "Yes, it is. And the way we fight it isn't by getting angry, though that feeling is natural and valid, but by living our lives with such dignity and excellence that we make those assumptions impossible to maintain. Have you ever had to prove someone's assumptions about you wrong? What gave you the strength to persevere? Share your experience in the comments below. The following Monday brought an unexpected development. As Marcus entered the classroom, he noticed a substitute teacher at Ms. Bradshaw's desk, a young woman with bright eyes and a welcoming smile who introduced herself as Ms. Chen. "Ms. Bradshaw will be away for 2 weeks attending a professional development course," she explained to the curious class. "I'll be with you until she returns." Whispers immediately circulated among the students. In the 5 years Ms. Bradshaw had taught at Lincoln Elementary, she had never taken time off mid-semester. Marcus caught Darius's questioning glance from across the room and shrugged in response, equally baffled. Ms. Chen's teaching style was noticeably different, more interactive, with group discussions and hands-on activities replacing the lecture and worksheet approach they were accustomed to. When science period arrived, she reviewed the project proposals with genuine enthusiasm, offering suggestions that built upon each student's ideas rather than highlighting potential failures. When she reached Marcus's irrigation system, her eyes widened appreciatively. "This is remarkable work," she said, studying the detailed diagrams. "The collection and redistribution system you've designed could actually be implemented in real community gardens." The praise, delivered without qualification or surprise, warmed Marcus from the inside out. "My dad and grandmother helped me design it," he said, the words coming easily without fear of judgment. "My grandmother has been gardening for decades." "It shows," Ms. Chen replied. "This combines traditional wisdom with modern engineering principles. I'm looking forward to seeing the finished project." That afternoon, when his father picked him up from school, Marcus couldn't wait to share the day's events. "Ms. Bradshaw's gone for 2 weeks, he announced as he climbed into the car. "And the substitute teacher really liked my project." His father's expression was unreadable as he navigated out of the school parking lot. "Is that so? What's this substitute teacher like?" Marcus described Ms. Chen's interactive teaching style and her positive response to his project. "She didn't seem surprised that it was good," he concluded. "Because she was evaluating the work, not making assumptions about who created it," his father noted. "Do you think Ms. Bradshaw is really at a professional development thing?" His father was quiet for a moment, considering his response. "It's possible. Teachers do attend continuing education courses." "But you don't think so?" Marcus pressed, sensing there was more to the story. "Let's just say that your grandmother had a very productive conversation with Principal Davis last week," his father replied carefully. "She mentioned her concerns about certain comments made in the classroom and suggested that perhaps some sensitivity training might be beneficial." The implication hung in the air between them. Marcus tried to imagine his elegant, soft-spoken grandmother confronting the school principal about Ms. Bradshaw's behavior. The mental image was both intimidating and deeply satisfying. "Grandma got Ms. Bradshaw in trouble?" he asked, torn between admiration and anxiety about potential repercussions. "Not trouble," his father corrected. "Growth opportunity. There's a difference. Your grandmother believes in education, for students and teachers alike." When they arrived home, Eleanor Fletcher was in the front yard, gardening gloves on her hands as she tenderly pruned her beloved rose bushes. The afternoon sun highlighted the silver in her hair, creating a halo effect around her dignified profile. "There's my scientist," she called as Marcus approached. "How was school today?" As Marcus recounted the day's events again for his grandmother's benefit, he watched her face carefully, looking for signs of satisfaction or smugness about Ms. Bradshaw's absence. But her expression remained serene, offering nothing more than appropriate interest in his school day. "Ms. Chen sounds like an excellent educator," was her only comment on the substitute teacher. Later that evening, as Marcus worked on his regular homework at the dining room table, he overheard his father and grandmother talking in the kitchen, their voices kept deliberately low. "You didn't have to call in favors with Rick Davis," his father was saying. "I could have handled it." "You'll be deployed again in 3 weeks," his grandmother replied, her tone gentle but firm. Marcus needs long-term allies at that school, not just a temporary show of force. "Is that what you think I provided? A show of force? You know that's not what I meant, James. You stood up for your son, exactly as you should have. But this situation requires more than a single confrontation. It requires systematic change." The conversation shifted to quieter tones, and Marcus couldn't make out the rest. But the phrase, systematic change, echoed in his mind as he returned to his math problems. He wasn't entirely sure what it meant, but it sounded important, powerful. The next 2 weeks with Ms. Chen transformed the classroom atmosphere. Students who had been quiet under Ms. Bradshaw's reign found their voices. Group projects fostered collaboration instead of competition. When the science fair projects were submitted for preliminary review, Ms. Chen organized a peer feedback session where students offered constructive suggestions to one another. "This is how real scientists work," she explained. "Science isn't done in isolation. It's a community effort, with peer review and collaborative problem-solving." During this session, Marcus was paired with Madison Whitley, a quiet girl whose project on butterfly migration patterns had been largely overlooked by Ms. Bradshaw. As they exchanged ideas, Marcus realized that Madison's research complemented his irrigation system in unexpected ways. "The native flowers I've included to attract pollinators would be perfect for your butterflies," he pointed out, showing her the small section of his design dedicated to flowering plants. Madison's face lit up with excitement. "And I have data on which flowers attract which species most effectively," she replied. "We could combine that information." By the end of the period, they had decided to set up their projects side by side at the science fair, creating a mini ecosystem that demonstrated both sustainable water management and pollinator support. If you're inspired by how these young students are coming together to create something greater than they could alone, hit that subscribe button. Uplifting stories of collaboration and growth are just a click away. The science fair was scheduled for Friday of the following week, Ms. Bradshaw's first day back from her professional development course. As the date approached, Marcus split his after-school time between completing his project in the garage with his father and collaborating with Madison at the local library, where they worked on creating a joint presentation that would highlight the connections between their individual projects. "Your grandmother's knowledge of native plant species is amazing," Madison commented during one of these sessions, poring over the handwritten notes Eleanor had provided. "My mom says most people have forgotten these traditional gardening techniques. Grandma says we lose wisdom when we don't value the knowledge of previous generations," Marcus replied, repeating one of his grandmother's favorite sayings. Madison nodded thoughtfully. "My dad says something similar about scientific progress, that we're too quick to discard outdated approaches without understanding their foundations." This casual exchange revealed a connection that transcended their superficial differences. Madison's father was a research scientist at the university. Her family lived in the affluent north side of town. Yet here they were, finding common ground in the wisdom of their elders. The night before the science fair, Marcus could barely sleep. His project was complete, tested, and ready for presentation. The irrigation system worked exactly as designed, efficiently distributing water to different plant sectors based on their specific needs. The small flowering section, enhanced with Madison's butterfly research, added both beauty and practical ecological benefit to the system. His father, noting his restlessness at breakfast, offered a rare personal disclosure. "I still get nervous before important presentations," he admitted, spreading peanut butter on his toast with precise, even strokes. 20 years in the military, countless briefings to commanding officers, and my stomach still knots up every time." "Really?" The revelation that his father, seemingly fearless and always composed, experienced nervousness was both surprising and comforting. "What do you do about it?" "I remind myself that nervousness and excitement create the same physical sensations. So I tell myself I'm not nervous, I'm excited to share something valuable with others." Marcus tried this mental reframing as they loaded his project into the car. Instead of dwelling on what might go wrong or how Ms. Bradshaw might react to his collaboration with Madison, he focused on his eagerness to demonstrate the irrigation system he was genuinely proud of. The school gymnasium had been transformed for the science fair. Rows of tables lined the space, each adorned with student projects ranging from simple poster presentations to elaborate working models. Parent volunteers directed traffic, helping students find their assigned spots and setting up additional chairs for the audience. Madison was already at their station, arranging her butterfly migration charts beside the space reserved for Marcus's irrigation system. Her parents hovered nearby, her father engrossed in conversation with another parent, her mother adjusting the display board with meticulous attention to alignment. "You must be Marcus," Madison's mother said as they approached, her smile warm and genuine. "Madison has told us so much about your collaboration. What a creative approach you've taken." The sincere praise, offered without the surprise or qualification that often accompanied compliments to Marcus, further calmed his nerves. As he and his father set up the irrigation system, Madison's father joined them, asking thoughtful questions about the water distribution mechanisms and nodding appreciatively at the answers. "This is remarkably sophisticated engineering for 5th grade level," he commented. "You've incorporated principles we use in large-scale agricultural systems." "My dad helped with the engineering aspects," Marcus explained, pride evident in his voice. "He's in the Corps of Engineers." The two fathers shook hands, easily falling into conversation about water conservation principles and structural integrity. Marcus and Madison exchanged smiles, both pleased by this natural alliance between their families. The gymnasium gradually filled with students, parents, teachers, and judges. Principal Davis made opening remarks, emphasizing the school's commitment to scientific inquiry and collaborative learning, phrases that seemed new to the school's usual rhetoric. As the judging began, Marcus scanned the room for Ms. Bradshaw. He spotted her near the entrance, clipboard in hand, speaking with one of the parent volunteers. She looked different somehow, less rigid, her expression more thoughtful than stern. When her gaze swept across the room and landed on his station, he braced himself for disapproval. Instead, she gave a small nod of acknowledgement before moving on to speak with another teacher. The judging process was both exhilarating and exhausting. Marcus and Madison took turns explaining different aspects of their connected projects, fielding questions from the 3-person judging panel with growing confidence. His father and grandmother stood a respectful distance away, allowing him this moment of independence while providing silent support through their presence. When the final judge moved on to the next station, Marcus exhaled deeply, feeling a mixture of relief and satisfaction. Regardless of the results, he knew they had presented their work with clarity and enthusiasm. The irrigation system had functioned perfectly during the demonstration, and Madison's butterfly data had impressed even the most skeptical judge. "You two make quite the team," his grandmother commented during a quiet moment between visitor waves. "Different strengths coming together for a common purpose." "That's what Ms. Chen taught us," Marcus replied. "That science is collaborative." Eleanor smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Ms. Chen sounds like a wise woman. Perhaps wisdom isn't always correlated with years of experience." The award ceremony was scheduled for the end of the fair. As students and parents gathered around the small stage set up at one end of the gymnasium, Principal Davis took the microphone once again. "Before we announce our winners, I want to acknowledge the exceptional quality of all the projects presented today," he began. "Our students have demonstrated not only scientific understanding but also creativity, problem-solving skills, and, in several notable cases, remarkable collaboration." The awards proceeded through various categories: Most Creative, Best Presentation, Most Scientifically Rigorous. Marcus and Madison exchanged nervous glances as each category was announced and winners were called forward. "And now, for our highest honor, the Innovation Award," Principal Davis continued. "This recognition goes to the project that combines scientific principles with practical application in a way that could positively impact our community. Have you ever collaborated with someone whose strengths complemented your own to create something neither could have accomplished alone? Tell us about your experience in the comments below." The gymnasium seemed to hold its collective breath. Madison reached out and squeezed Marcus's hand briefly, a gesture of solidarity regardless of the outcome. The Innovation Award goes to Marcus Fletcher and Madison Whitley for their integrated irrigation and pollinator support system. The applause was immediate and enthusiastic. Marcus felt momentarily frozen, the announcement not fully registering until Madison tugged at his arm, urging him toward the stage. As they accepted the award, a gleaming trophy and a certificate for each of them, Marcus caught sight of his father and grandmother in the audience. His father stood tall, pride evident in his posture, while his grandmother dabbed discreetly at her eyes with a handkerchief. After the ceremony, as families began to disperse and students dismantled their projects, Ms. Bradshaw approached their station. Marcus tensed instinctively, but her expression held none of the dismissiveness he had come to expect. "Congratulations, Marcus, Madison," she said, her tone formal but not cold. "Your project was exceptionally well conceived and executed." "Thank you, Ms. Bradshaw," they responded in near unison. She hesitated, seeming to struggle with what to say next. "I understand you worked with Ms. Chen to develop the collaborative aspect of your presentation." "Yes," Marcus confirmed. "She helped us see how our projects complemented each other." Ms. Bradshaw nodded, a flicker of something, regret? Reflection? Crossing her features. "Well, I look forward to having you both back in class on Monday. Perhaps you could present your project to the rest of the students, explain your process." The offer was unexpected. Ms. Bradshaw rarely gave students this kind of platform. "We'd like that," Marcus said, speaking for both of them after a confirming glance at Madison. As Ms. Bradshaw moved away, Madison's mother approached, beaming with pride. "We're having a small celebration dinner at our home tonight," she said. "We'd be honored if Marcus and his family would join us." The invitation, delivered with genuine warmth, bridged worlds that had seemed separate just weeks before. As Marcus's father and grandmother joined the conversation, accepting the invitation with equal sincerity, Marcus felt a sense of expansion, as if the room, the school, perhaps even the community had somehow grown larger, more inclusive. Later that evening, as the two families shared a meal around the Whitleys' dining table, the conversation flowed easily between topics, from science and education to community initiatives and family traditions. Madison's father, Dr. Whitley, expressed particular interest in Eleanor's community gardening expertise. The university's agricultural outreach program has been trying to incorporate more traditional and sustainable practices, he explained. "Your knowledge would be invaluable to our efforts." Eleanor's surprise was evident. "I'm just a retired English teacher who likes to get her hands dirty," she demurred. "With respect, Mrs. Fletcher, you're much more than that," Dr. Whitley insisted. "Madison showed me your planting calendar and companion plant guide. Your understanding of local growing conditions and natural pest management techniques is exactly what our program needs." The conversation shifted to possibilities: guest lectures, workshop series, documentation of traditional practices. Eleanor's initial hesitation gave way to cautious enthusiasm, particularly when Mrs. Whitley, who managed the university's community outreach office, offered administrative support for the initiative. On the drive home, the car filled with comfortable silence, Marcus reflected on the evening. "Something important happened today," he said finally. "Didn't it?" His father, eyes on the road, nodded. "Several important things happened today. You won an award. You made new friends. You faced someone who had hurt you and stood your ground with dignity. And Grandma might work with the university," Marcus added. "Yes," his father agreed. "Your grandmother's wisdom may finally receive the recognition it deserves beyond our family and community." From the back seat, Eleanor's voice was soft but clear. All because a boy refused to be defined by someone else's limited perception of him. The following Monday, Marcus entered Ms. Bradshaw's classroom with a different energy. The nervousness that had been his constant companion since the father-at-home comment had transformed into something more solid, more grounded. Madison greeted him with a wave, pointing to the classroom schedule written on the whiteboard. Their presentation was slotted for the afternoon science period. Ms. Bradshaw was different too. The change was subtle but noticeable in how she interacted with students, in the increased group activities, in her more frequent use of praise and encouragement. During their presentation, she sat among the students, asking thoughtful questions that highlighted the strengths of their project. "What inspired you to connect your irrigation system specifically to butterfly support?" she asked during the Q&A session. Marcus glanced at Madison before answering. "It started with my grandmother's gardening knowledge. She always says that a garden isn't just for humans, it's part of a larger ecosystem. And then when I heard about Madison's butterfly research, I realized we could demonstrate that connection. That's excellent systems thinking, Ms. Bradshaw noted, actually writing down his response in her notebook. Recognizing interconnections between seemingly separate elements. If you've been moved by this story of transformation and recognition, please hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us bring more stories of dignity and positive change to light. As the school year progressed toward summer, subtle but significant changes continued to unfold. Ms. Bradshaw's teaching style evolved, incorporating more of the collaborative approach Ms. Chen had introduced. The science fair projects, instead of being packed away and forgotten, were displayed in the school lobby as examples of student innovation. Marcus and Madison's friendship deepened through their shared interest in environmental science. Their families maintained connection as well, especially as Eleanor began working with the university's agricultural outreach program, documenting traditional gardening practices and teaching workshops that attracted surprising interest from the community. 2 weeks before the end of the school year, Principal Davis announced a new initiative, a student-led diversity and inclusion council that would work with teachers and administrators to ensure all students felt valued and represented in school activities and curriculum. When volunteers were requested for the founding committee, Marcus raised his hand without hesitation. "Are you sure?" Darius asked at lunch that day. "That sounds like a lot of extra work." Marcus considered his friend's question seriously. "It is work," he agreed. "But it's important work. And maybe if we do it right, other kids won't have to go through what I did." The council's first meeting was scheduled after school the following week. As Marcus waited in the library for other student volunteers and faculty advisors to arrive, he was surprised to see Ms. Bradshaw enter, carrying a stack of books and resource materials. "Marcus," she acknowledged, setting the materials on the large central table. "I thought you might be here early." He nodded, uncertain how to respond. Despite the changes in her classroom approach, he still felt a lingering wariness in one-on-one interactions with her. Ms. Bradshaw seemed to sense his discomfort. She sat down across from him, her hands folded on the table between them. "I owe you an apology," she said directly. "The comment I made about your father was inappropriate and hurtful. There's no excuse for it." The acknowledgement, delivered without qualification or deflection, caught Marcus off guard. He had imagined this moment many times over the past weeks, but in his imagination, he had responded with cool dignity or clever retorts. The reality was messier. He felt a confusing mix of vindication, lingering hurt, and unexpected compassion for the obvious difficulty this admission caused her. "Thank you for saying that," he finally managed, his grandmother's lessons on grace guiding his response. "The professional development course I attended," Ms. Bradshaw continued, "was specifically about recognizing and addressing unconscious bias in education. I volunteered for it after your father's visit and subsequent conversations with Principal Davis and your grandmother." This revelation aligned with what Marcus had suspected, but hearing it confirmed was still surprising. "My grandmother talked to you?" Ms. Bradshaw's smile was rueful. "Mrs. Fletcher was my English teacher many years ago. She was demanding but fair, qualities I thought I embodied as a teacher. Our conversation helped me recognize how far I had drifted from that ideal." Other students and faculty advisors began to arrive, ending their private conversation. But as the meeting commenced, Marcus noticed how Ms. Bradshaw consistently elevated student voices, particularly those like his that had often been overlooked in school settings. That evening, as his father helped him pack for an upcoming weekend trip to visit relatives, Marcus recounted Ms. Bradshaw's apology and the productive council meeting that followed. "It takes courage to acknowledge when you've been wrong," his father observed, folding T-shirts with military precision. "Especially for someone in a position of authority." Is that why some people never admit they're wrong? Because they're afraid it makes them look weak? His father paused, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "That's part of it. Real strength isn't about never making mistakes. It's about having the integrity to acknowledge them and the discipline to do better going forward." "Like you do in the military." "Like I try to do," his father corrected with a smile. "I'm still learning too, just like Ms. Bradshaw. Just like all of us." As the school year drew to a close, Marcus received an unexpected invitation. Ms. Bradshaw asked if he would help review potential science curriculum materials for the following year's 5th grade class. "Your perspective would be valuable," she explained. especially regarding how we might incorporate more collaborative projects and traditional knowledge alongside conventional scientific approaches. The request represented a complete reversal of their relationship from the beginning of the year, from dismissal to active seeking of his input. Marcus agreed, scheduling several afternoon sessions during the first week of summer vacation. During these sessions, working side by side with Ms. Bradshaw and 2 other teachers, Marcus experienced a new kind of confidence. His suggestions were considered seriously. His questions prompted thoughtful discussions about teaching approaches. When he proposed incorporating elements of Madison's butterfly research and his irrigation system as a case study, the teachers enthusiastically integrated it into the curriculum plan. "You have excellent instincts for what engages students," Ms. Bradshaw commented during their final session. "Have you ever considered becoming a teacher yourself?" The question startled him. At 10 years old, career paths seemed distant, abstract concepts. "I never thought about it," he admitted. "You should," she said simply. "We need educators who understand both the science and the students." Have you ever received an apology that changed how you saw someone? How did you respond, and what did you learn from the experience? Share your thoughts in the comments. Summer unfolded with its own rhythm. Long days split between helping his grandmother with her university workshops, exploring the woods behind their house with Darius, and occasional collaborative projects with Madison, whose family home was now a regular destination for weekend visits. His father's approaching deployment lingered on the horizon, a bittersweet reality they had all learned to navigate. But this time felt different, with stronger community connections and support systems in place. 2 weeks before his father's departure date, they received a letter from the school district. Inside was a formal certificate of appreciation for Eleanor Fletcher's contributions to the new community garden program being established at Lincoln Elementary, inspired by the irrigation system design for Marcus's science fair project. "They're implementing it," Marcus marveled, reading the accompanying letter. "They're actually going to build a version of our system for the school." His grandmother remained composed, but her eyes shone with pleasure as she examined the certificate. "It seems they are. And look," his father pointed to a paragraph near the end of the letter. "They're naming the garden after you, Mom. The Eleanor Fletcher Community Garden will be dedicated at the start of the next school year." For once, his grandmother seemed at a loss for words. She sat heavily in her favorite armchair, the certificate trembling slightly in her hands. "After all these years," she murmured, more to herself than to them. "After pushing me into early retirement because my methods were outdated. Your wisdom was just waiting for the right moment to be recognized," his father said gently, kneeling beside her chair. "For the right people to listen." The garden dedication ceremony was scheduled for the week before school began, timing that would allow his father to attend before his deployment. As the date approached, their home became a hub of activity. Eleanor reviewed her notes and seed catalogs, selecting appropriate plantings for the school garden's first season. James contacted fellow engineers from his unit who volunteered to help with the irrigation installation. Marcus and Madison worked on educational materials that would help students understand and maintain the system. On the morning of the dedication, Marcus stood between his father and grandmother, watching as Principal Davis cut the ceremonial ribbon stretched across the entrance to what had once been an unused section of the school grounds. Now, raised garden beds filled with rich soil formed a pattern of concentric circles, connected by the irrigation system that had grown from a science fair project to a practical community resource. "This garden represents our commitment to combining innovation with traditional wisdom," Principal Davis announced to the gathered crowd of students, parents, and community members. "We are honored to name it after a woman who has embodied that balance throughout her career as an educator and community leader, Mrs. Eleanor Fletcher." Applause rippled through the audience as Eleanor stepped forward to accept a commemorative plaque. Her posture, always dignified, seemed to gain an additional dimension of pride as she addressed the gathering. "A garden teaches us patience," she began, her teacher's voice carrying clearly across the space. "It shows us that growth isn't always visible above the surface, that the most important development often happens in the dark, beneath the soil, before anyone else can see it." Her gaze found Marcus in the crowd, a smile of profound love and pride passing between them. "This garden will feed bodies with its produce, minds with its lessons in science and sustainability, and spirits with its beauty and connection to the natural world. I am deeply honored by this recognition, but the true credit belongs to my grandson, Marcus, and his friend Madison, whose vision inspired this project." The attention shifted to Marcus and Madison, standing side by side near the front of the crowd. Madison nudged him forward slightly, and Marcus found himself addressing the gathered community. "My grandmother always says that wisdom doesn't belong to any one person. It belongs to all of us if we're willing to listen and learn from each other," he said, finding confidence in the truth of these words. "This garden isn't just about growing plants. It's about growing understanding between different generations, different backgrounds, different ways of knowing." As he stepped back, his father's hand settled on his shoulder, a steady pressure of pride and support. Through the crowd, Marcus caught Ms. Bradshaw's eye. She nodded once, a gesture of respect between equals. The garden dedication transitioned into a community celebration, with volunteers signing up for maintenance shifts, children exploring the educational stations Madison had designed, and community members contributing seeds and cuttings from their own gardens to diversify the plantings. If you've been inspired by this journey of transformation and recognition, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. Your support helps bring more stories of quiet courage and dignity to light. The evening before his father's deployment, the three of them sat on the back porch, watching fireflies rise from the grass as twilight deepened. The garden dedication had seemed like a culmination, but already new possibilities were unfolding. Eleanor had been invited to develop a curriculum around traditional gardening practices for the school district. Madison's father had secured a small grant to document the irrigation system's efficiency. The Diversity and Inclusion Council had expanded to include parent and community representatives. "You've started something important," his father said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Something that will continue growing even while I'm away." Marcus leaned against his father's solid presence, memorizing the feeling to carry through the months ahead. "I didn't do it alone," he replied. "No one does anything truly meaningful alone," his grandmother agreed from her rocking chair. That was always Harriet Bradshaw's blind spot as a teacher, believing that achievement is a solitary pursuit. "She's learning," Marcus said, thinking of the genuine changes he'd observed, the apology that had required real courage. People can change when they're willing to see differently. His father's arm tightened around his shoulders. "That's the most important lesson in all of this, son. Systems don't change until the people within them change how they see and what they value." The next morning, driving to the airfield for their farewell, Marcus mentally prepared for the familiar ritual of separation. But as they parked and walked toward the gathering point for deploying soldiers and their families, he realized something had shifted within him as well. The fear and resentment that had previously accompanied his father's departures, the worry that his absence somehow reflected on their family's value or completeness, had been replaced by a more complex understanding. His father's service was one part of a multifaceted life. His absence was not a statement about their family, but a temporary physical separation that couldn't diminish their connection. Staff Sergeant James Fletcher knelt to embrace his son, the same dignified strength evident in his uniform as in his civilian clothes. "I'm prouder of you than I can say," he said quietly. "Not just for what you've accomplished, but for who you're becoming." Marcus hugged him fiercely, memorizing his father's familiar scent, crisp laundry, subtle aftershave, and something essentially him that defied description. "I'll keep working on the things we started," he promised. "And I'll write to you about all of it. I know you will." His father stood, turning to embrace Eleanor. "Take care of each other," he told them both. "And remember, I'm always with you, even when I'm not physically present." As they watched him walk toward the waiting aircraft, Eleanor's hand warm and steady in his, Marcus felt a certainty settle within him, a knowledge that transcended his 10 years. The question his grandmother had posed weeks ago, "Will you become small and bitter? Or will you stand tall and show them who you truly are?" had been answered, not just for himself but for an expanding circle of his community. The summer breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass and his grandmother's roses, mingling with jet fuel and the metallic tang of the airfield. Above them, swallows darted and swooped, following patterns invisible to human eyes but essential to their nature. The world was wider than it had been months ago, its possibilities more varied, its connections more evident. "He'll be back before we know it," his grandmother said, squeezing his hand as the aircraft taxied down the runway. "And in the meantime, we have work to do." Marcus nodded, already thinking of the garden lessons they would develop for the new school year, the Diversity Council meetings scheduled for late summer, the collaborative projects taking shape with Madison and other new friends. "Yes," he agreed, watching the aircraft rise into the blue expanse of sky, carrying his father toward distant duties while leaving his influence firmly rooted in the community they called home. We definitely have work to do. The fifth-grade classroom looked different when Marcus entered it on the first day of the new school year. Not just because he now sat in the sixth-grade section, but because the room itself had been transformed. Student work from diverse perspectives adorned the walls, a small indoor extension of the community garden flourished near the windows, and Ms. Bradshaw greeted each student with genuine interest in their summer experiences. From his new vantage point, Marcus could see his own journey reflected in the changes around him, not as an endpoint but as part of an ongoing process of growth and recognition. The irrigation system he had designed with his father's help and his grandmother's wisdom now nourished plants that would feed both bodies and minds. The relationships he had formed across previously separate social circles continued to flourish and expand. And in his pocket, he carried his father's most recent letter, describing engineering projects in distant landscapes while asking for updates on the community garden's progress. The distance between them was geographical, not emotional, a distinction that Ms. Bradshaw's thoughtless comment had once challenged but could no longer threaten. Have you ever been part of creating positive change in your community? Big or small, every action counts. Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might inspire others to take that first step. As Marcus settled into his new desk, he caught sight of Madison entering the classroom, her smile bright with recognition and shared purpose. Behind her came Ms. Bradshaw, pausing briefly at his desk to welcome him back with the respect one colleague might offer another. And through the classroom windows, he could see the Eleanor Fletcher Community Garden where his grandmother would be teaching the first workshop of the term that afternoon. The classroom was silent except for the muffled sound of the central air conditioner, but it was a different quality of silence than that spring day months ago, not the silence of suppression and judgment, but the quiet anticipation of voices about to be heard, ideas about to be shared, connections about to be made. Marcus opened his notebook, ready to continue the story that had only just begun. If you found this journey of dignity and transformation inspiring, click on the video appearing on your screen now for an even more powerful story of courage that will move you in ways you never expected.